When I look at 24 throne zones and I look at buildings all over Hong Kong filled with people filled with the Spirit, I get very afraid. I think that's impossible. Really. Yeah. I'm a businessman, and one of the things that I do is to try and make more business and get more customers. It's hard to make money. It really is. You to get a new business and try and get people, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of process to get places. And I know how tough that is, and I've had probably more failures than successes. Then I look at church and I think this is even more difficult, because this is not some financial transaction. This is deep spiritual truths. And now we're going to get to 24 throne zones. This is impossible. But when I look at live to fill people with the Spirit, that's easy. Because we're filled with the Spirit. We can do that. We can do that. And then it's on God's agenda to fill the buildings full of people, full of His Spirit. It's not on our agenda. Our agenda is to be filled continually with the Spirit. We can do that. And you know what? We can do that during Omicron. We can do that through political unrest. We can do that locked up in prison. You can be filled in the Spirit like Paul and Silas in the middle of a prison. I can do that. I can be filled with the Spirit. Yeah. I don't want to be in prison, but I can be filled. So God's been saying to me, the beginning of this year, He said, Sean, I really want to encourage people. I really want to lift people up. I really want to inspire people with how strong I am and my ability and my power. Saying, God, that's so wonderful. He's so good. Every single one of us could stand up right now and just admire God and worship Him about His attributes and His actions that He's done for us personally. And that's wonderful. You need to be reminded of that. You need to live in that. He said to me, Sean, but I don't only want to just lift people up. I also want people to get better at digging down. Because if you just want inspiration and encouragement and a hand up, and we all need that, and we need to be continually in that, then you'll never develop an endurance and a patience and a capacity to sustain through difficult times, because it'll always be just God rescuing you, and He will rescue you every single time. There's no question, and thank God for that. We all need rescue. Almost every morning I need a rescue out of bed. No condemnation in that at all. Take every rescue that comes. But He also wants us to develop an endurance and a patience. Hebrews 6:12, faith and patience inherit the promises. And when you have that endurance, it comes from a place of having dug down to a foundation that allows you to walk through those difficult processes in order for God to bring you through to your promise. You may have a lovely little Christian idea that you want to get people saved. You just want Jesus to love people. That's a beautiful idea, and it's right. But don't think that just because you want to get people saved, you're not going to get people who hate you, who want to slap you or put you in prison or lock you up, put you on a cross. That's happened before, I'm pretty sure. Don't think just because you want to do nice things that other people will go, oh, that's a nice thing, let you just go ahead. No, there's an endurance that comes even with that beautiful thing about spreading the gospel. If you want to pray for people, I don't know has anyone ever tried to pray for someone on the street, out in public? It's not easy, right? It's really difficult. Number one, you've got to overcome your own insecurities, and are people watching, and there's that thing. But then even when you start to pray for people, you encounter people who are angry, who are irritated. You might want to just heal people. I just want to pray for people. Not many people want you to pray for them. Sometimes they're angry. So there's an endurance that comes. I understand that you're angry with me. I'm going to pray for you anyway, because God has told me this thing. So even in these beautiful Christian ideas, there's opposition. There's going against the grain. There's going upriver, and you've got to have an endurance. The way that you have that endurance is you learn to dig down. A foundation is something that connects your fixtures, something like your house where you've got beautiful lights and maybe walls and bedrooms and your fridge. Beautiful things, beautiful fixtures that connects those fixtures to something solid that stops that whole house shaking, moving, and breaking apart. if you don't have a strong enough foundation, something that's been dug down into the ground that can access something deeper, then you may put up beautiful fixtures and beautiful promises, and I just want to share the gospel. I just want to pray for people. I just want to be a blessing. If you don't have a foundation, then the second opposition comes. It's like an earthquake. It's like a torrent of a flood. It's like any little bit of opposition will come along and put a shearing force on that house. It's exactly what happens. If sand starts to shift on a house that doesn't have a deep enough foundation, the shearing force will put pressure in certain areas and it'll start to crumble and break apart. And then your beautiful fixtures have nowhere to call home. You can't just be a nice little uplifted Christian. You've got to be someone with deep foundations. That's what Jesus said in Luke 6. Let me tell you what a wise man's like. He's someone who heard my words and did them. Not someone else's words, not religious words, not the old covenant words, Jesus' words, and then put them into practice. That's the digging down. And then in the day of trouble, when the torrent came, they withstand the storm. So if your foundation isn't deep enough, things will come along. Hey, Kevin. No, it's hard to sneak into this building. We all know you're being naughty. Make sure you write down your name. So God doesn't just want to encourage you, although He does. He wants you to dig down so you can withstand, so you can endure, so you have the patience to inherit the promise. The things that can come, let me say this. A foundation that is strong in one area and weak in another doesn't mean that your house or your building, your structure, will sustain itself through an earthquake or through a flood. If it's strong in one place and weak in another place, that shearing force will actually be extenuated. It'll actually become worse. You're better off having all weak foundations can shift all together. And so some Christians will come to church and say, I'm really strong on faith, and I know faith. But if they don't understand that there's other dimensions of your walk with Jesus, and there's a patience, and there's a grace, and there's a hard working in grace, and there's love, and there's fruits of the Spirit, and it's not just faith, then you won't be able to stand. There's multiple different dimensions that God wants you to dig down in. If you're just a one-dimensional Christian, you won't stand. You won't produce much. And then you'll feel weak. You'll feel like, I can't go through one more. I can't go through another delay. I can't go through another 2-week shutdown. I can't go through another relationship breaking down. When you have a strong enough foundations in multiple different dimensions, you know within your own self, God, you've given me a foundation that can walk through anything that comes my way. Takes a lot of time to develop that. You don't develop that in one Sunday and go, I've decided to build a foundation, and there it is. It starts with a decision, but it takes a long time to build these foundations or the aspects of this foundation. And there's things that can come and eat away at a foundation. There are parasites, termites that can come and eat a foundation. Even if you've got a strong foundation, and you don't maintain it, and you don't protect it, you can have things that come and make you think that there's a foundation, but it takes away the substance. That's what a termite does. It eats through whatever's been dug into the ground. And then one day the testing comes, and you think, I've been through this, I'm all right. No, but something's been taken away, and you need to readdress that thing. So you can think, man, I know this, I know about faith, I know about grace. And 3 years later, you're like, where am I? I thought I knew this. No, you need to constantly maintain. You need to constantly grow. You need to constantly stretch in these foundations. You don't just set and forget. You set and remember those foundations. That's why we come to church every week. That's why it's such a powerful thing to be reminded of multiple different dimensions and facets of what God wants to give us. Isn't it amazing that there's not a single fruit of the Holy Spirit? There's 9. Isn't the Holy Spirit so powerful? Can't He just give us one fruit and that would be enough? No, there's dimensions in the kingdom because He wants our foundations to be multifaceted, multidimension. I've got a lot more to say on that. I'm not sure if it's appropriate. Say it. He wants to lift us up, and he wants us to dig down. Even if you think about a tree, you could make a case that the roots are more important than the leaves. But without the leaves, there is no photosynthesis. There is no energy conversion. Without the roots, there's no anchor. There's no substance. You can't just have God lifting you up and encouraging you. You got to have something that anchors you, that sustains you. Those roots actually store some of the energy from the leaves for a later time when they need it. I was thinking about this week. I was saying, God, I've got different things to say. I'm saying, God, I don't know if it's the right season. He said, Sean, for some people, it's the right season to give this word. He said, for others, it's not the right season. But it's something that when they get into that season, they'll remember and it'll sustain them then. You got to have continual messages, continual words, God speaking to you, scriptures, preachers, because it might not be appropriate right now, but in 3 years' time, it'll be the perfect thing that you've got deep in your roots, that those roots then push up through the sap and bring nutrients to that tree that can sustain it through dry times, difficult times. Give it nutrients. You got to not just be encouraged, you got to dig down. It's both. And you can't just dig down and not be encouraged. You got to have both. So what the foundation does is it anchors that structure, all the fixtures, all the beautiful things that go inside a house or a building. It anchors that structure to a foundation. Now think about this. A yacht sailing in the ocean. It's got an anchor on board. And you may say, an anchor will really help a ship in a tough time, in a storm. But if that anchor is on board that ship, all the weight and all the shape and all the substance of the anchor will not help that ship one iota. Because an anchor in and of itself does not help you. A root in and of itself does not help anybody, does not help a tree. It's what that root is connected to. So we often mistake what we call a foundation as the foundation, and it isn't. It's just a connection point. It's an intermediary between your substance and who you are and the substance that can actually sustain you. Don't be confused. An anchor cannot save you. It's not strong enough, it's not powerful enough, it's not big enough. But it's the intermediary power and force that connects you to the thing that can save you. Some people are trying to live by an anchor. They've got an anchor. If you talk to them about foundations, they will say, I've got a foundation. I know all the scriptures on foundations. We've heard 15 preachers of them. We've all heard 15 preachers on foundations. And they'll go, I've got an anchor. I've got an anchor. I know my word. I know my Bible. I've been through tough times. And they know all about it. And they think that that anchor is good enough. It's not about the anchor. It's about what that anchor connects you to. Now think about this. The chosen people of God, the very people that he called to go into the promised land, Israelites. Israel was God's chosen people to demonstrate who he was. They were their footstool on the earth. So that all nations could look at the Jewish people and go, wow, God is real. And the glory of God was supposed to shine through them. Those people had an anchor. It's all about having a foundation, right? Yes. But it's not the foundation itself, it's what the foundation connects you to. Their foundation, their anchor, connected them to an old covenant. They had 613 laws, and then they had big 10 powerful laws on top of that. And those laws were their foundation. That's what connected, that was their connection to the law. And it was meant to keep their life flowing in the right direction. It was meant to keep peace amongst brothers. It was how to decide certain things that happened in society. It was how to approach God. That's the most important one. How do you actually approach God? This whole framework was laid out with this foundation. And their connection was through that. In fact, when a high priest would go into the temple system, I'm sure you guys all know this, they would tie a rope around his leg. Do you know that? He was anchored. Because often when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, he would die. And they would have to, no one else was allowed in. So they would tie the rope around his leg. So if he did die, and they'd have bells to hear if there was still like the cows in the field. If he did die and the bells stopped ringing, they would drag him out. He was anchored to this earth. And the Israelites were anchored to a system that actually couldn't produce much in them. And it produced death. It produced destruction. It produced religion. It produced hard hearts. And it couldn't do what it was intended to do. Or it did do what it was intended to do, but what they thought it was intended to do, it couldn't produce. They thought by the law they could become righteous. And so their anchor was to the wrong thing. They had a hope in the law. That's what they hoped in. Jesus comes along. A little while later, after the Jews have got this long and rich history with miracles, but also destruction, this up and down kingdom. And Jesus comes along and he says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. He says, no one gets to the Father except through me. They were trying to get to the Father through their anchor, a good anchor. We know about anchors. But they had connected that anchor to the law. And Hebrews 9, talking about the old covenant and that whole system and the temple system and the lampstands and the tents and the different categories of where you're allowed to go, talking about all of that stuff, says all of that stuff just reminded people how useless they were. That's all it did. And every time they did it, it just reminded them even more of how useless they were. They could not approach God, even though they thought that was the methodology to approach God. And then it says in, I think, verse 15, it says, but now Jesus is our mediator of a better covenant. In Hebrews 6, it talks about Jesus we have an anchor for our soul. Not an anchor to this world, but an anchor up to heaven. A connection point that doesn't connect us with something that's going to kill us. It connects us with something that's going to bring us life. Remember, it's not just about your anchor. It's about what your anchor connects you to. And so we're not just trying to build good biblical foundations. Christians talk about biblical foundations. That's true and that's right. But that could mean 100 different things to 100 different people. It's about being connected to that spirit of life. And when you're connected to that spirit of life, there's a wellspring that flows up. You become an oasis. You become a force of peace on a planet full of strife. Don't just build any old foundation. Build a foundation that's connected with our intermediary force, our intermediary connector. Jesus is a connector. Because he's going to be the way, the truth, and the life. City Church, we can march forward. We can continue to grow. We can continue to go deeper in him through any Omicron. Give us the next variant too. Don't let the externals drive your decision making. Don't let issues influence the way that you're going to walk out your life. They can affect us, and sometimes they do. Make sure your main influence, because you're anchored to the new covenant, you're anchored to God himself through Jesus, that you let that be the presiding force and the main factor in how you live out your life. And at the same time, make sure you stay encouraged. Make sure you lift up your leaves like the trees do and say, God, give me your sunlight. Give me your affection. Give me your love. Let me continue to reassess foundations, my connections, because maybe there's areas in my life where I've connected to an old covenant. Maybe I've got old ideas. Maybe I'm shearing under pressure. There's a shearing force because sometimes I'm living from a new covenant place and sometimes I'm living from an old covenant place. And I've connected to two different worlds. Lord, show me how I can connect more and more with who you are and not legalistic principles. We have thousands of years of history in different cultures. We have thousands of years of religious training. And from the very first man that ever was born on the earth, he was a murderer. You know, Cain killed his own brother. He didn't just murder someone down the street. He killed his own brother, someone he was supposed to look after. He was supposed to bless. That is our heritage. That's what people want to go into their bloodlines and curses and all that ancestral stuff. Well, that's what we've got in our blood, is murdering each other. And so some people want to have an anchor that connects them to undoing this sort of stuff. You're not going to undo it. Using the same techniques that he was trying to use. He was jealous, he was upset, and he tried to undo the predicament he was in by murder. That's all. I'm going down the wrong rabbit trail. Religion is murderous, and it's connecting you to an old covenant concept that is full of murder. There was even times in the law that you had to kill people. And there was ways to kill people. In the new covenant, there's life, there's blessing, there's honoring even your enemies. And that's what I can see happening in this time. I can see people starting to bite each other. Not in this church, genuinely, I really mean that. But in the world, I can see people starting to get antsy with each other. They're starting to blame, they're starting to shift. There's a murderous thing that's going around the earth right now where people think there's not enough, there's a fear, there's a hatred, and it's not just a hatred of people over there. Sometimes it's a hatred of your own neighbor and your own brother. And so God's been saying to me, Sean, watch what's happening on the planet. This is just normal, good old Cain stuff. Because people are anchored to the wrong thing. And whilst Abel was focused on God and what God was able to do, favor just flowed. But what Cain was focused on Abel, and he didn't access his own anchor point, he became murderous. And there are people in the planet today who are becoming more and more murderous because they're not anchored in the right direction. And so because they're anchored to something earthly, they look around for earthly excuses. And they become more antsy, more frustrated, more irritated. Traffic issues in Hong Kong where people don't stop for each other. There's more of an intensity. And, I've got to fight my own way because they don't believe that God's favor is available because they have no access. Don't go down that rabbit trail. In your own heart, make sure you're clean in terms of being connected to the new covenant. God will direct you. God will show you things to do and not do. But don't make decisions based on what Abel's doing because you're jealous. You make sure you stay centered. You make sure you have access. And when you live like that, you are an oasis. Because whilst there's nothing else flowing into you, there's something flowing up through you. Well, bless you, everyone. Thank you so much for your bravery, for your strength, and we bless your week. Pray that you just feel His peace into every single day. See you next week. Thank you, everyone.